Hello and welcome to another episode of a Brothers Creed podcast where we talk about motivation, experiences, and exploring the world around us. We're the Thomas brothers, and I'm Ethan.
And I'm Jared. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about some stories of valor. And this is it's an interesting kind of concept or attribute that I think is sometimes overlooked in our modern day, but I think there's plenty of examples all around us of people demonstrating valor. So we're excited to share some stories. Most of my stories aren't actually war stories. Are yours, Ethan?
A couple of them are.
So anyway, we'll get a little bit of a mix here, so it should be good. So let's go ahead and jump in.
All right, let's do it.
Spartans! What is your profession?
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills that make me a nightmare.
If I can change, and you can change, everybody can change!
Let us all unite! Let us fight for a new world, a decent world.
All right. So, as Jared said, we're going to be talking valor today. So I went in and I kind of looked a little bit about the definition of valor. What is valor? And valor is really, just kind of thinking of it from what I knew and understood of it. It was just being brave, right? And I think a lot of times that's compared to like war and battle type situations. But I think there's lots of different situations and scenarios where people can be valiant, right? Which is kind of the action of valor, that they can have valor. So valor is great courage in the face of danger, especially in battle.
Yep.
And then I looked up valiant, someone who's valiant, and it was possessing or showing courage or determination.
Yeah,
which I thought was interesting.
That is interesting. Determination to keep going. I found a couple of definitions that I liked. There's one Latin saying, which when you're saying things in Latin, it always makes you seem so much cooler.
Oh yeah.
Molan
labe.
Exactly. Well, actually, I don't think that's Latin. I think that was Greek.
Oh, Greek. I think it was Greek. Yeah.
But this is a Latin. So it's virtus in actione consistit, and so. Virtue and action is consistent. So it's what that means is not virtue. Valor lies in action. So I thought that was cool. Like, you cannot have valor and be someone who is not doing anything or lazy. So I love that little saying. Maybe they should get a tattoo across the underside of your arm with that or something. Valor lies in action.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that kind of reminds me of something that I've heard from several different people, whether it's Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate or some of these other people, that they say the measure of a true man is not in his his inability to do harm. The measure of a true man is the ability for him to do harm and choosing not to. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like being weak and not being able to do something is not beneficial.
You're not virtuous because you can't hurt people.
Not virtuous because you can't do anything.
It's a virtue when you can and you don't because you choose not to. Because how many people out there would just love to absolutely go out and kill as many people as they could? But how many people can do that but they don't because they actually have morals? There was another quote here that I have. This is from Michel de Montaigne. I probably butchered that, but it's an old guy. Valor,
the Count of Monte Cristo.
Yes. Valor is stability, not of legs and arms, but of courage and the soul. So I think just kind of taking the piece out about not of legs and arms, he's saying valor is stability of courage and the soul. So stability of the soul, stability of your courage. I liked that. It's more. It has more to do with the core of yourself than it does how strong how just your legs or your arms or how much you talk. It's done in action, and it's that core of you that drives that action.
Yeah.
Also,
I
go ahead. Yeah.
Well, you finish your thought.
I was going to say also, as many people well know, old Bill Shakespeare, as Tommy Boy would say, he was famously known for saying that the discretion is the better part of valor, which means that sometimes avoiding a dangerous situation or unpleasant situation is the more sensible thing to do. So the better part of valor. You don't necessarily always have to go fight. Sometimes it's having the discretion to walk away. And I think that's, you go back to like what Jocko talks about. And he's like, that's why he talks about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he's like, if someone's trying to fight me, I can always just run away from them. But he's like, if I'm on the ground and someone's on top of me, I have to fight. And that's where Jiu-Jitsu comes in. And that's why he thinks it's, so powerful. But so in that situation, the discretion to run away is valor in a sense, or the better part of valor, as old Bill says.
Yeah. Well, and he's a perfect example of someone who can do something and jack some people up.
Oh yeah,
but would probably choose not to for a lot of different reasons, because he knows his capabilities and he doesn't want to get sued. He doesn't want to hurt somebody, beyond the self-defense or whatever else it might be. And so, your most powerful weapon is your legs.
Imagine getting a punch straight to straight to the mouth from Jocko. You'd be knocked out, man.
Yeah. Getting a Joe Rogan sidekick right to the face.
Oh gosh.
He's got like a really powerful kick.
Oh really? He's got that Muay Thai he's been practicing probably.
Yeah, like hardcore. Like I think one of the highest in the industry.
What do you mean? Highest kicks?
No, like highest power kicks in the industry.
Joe Rogan?
Yeah.
What industry?
Yeah, look it up. It's crazy. Just like in all of kind of Muay Thai and I mean he doesn't fight MMA, but he trains.
Huh.
And look at what he's got. It's crazy.
Okay, I'll check that out.
So it's whenever I think valor and bravery and being valiant, it always kind of brings me back to the young Boy Scout Ethan. And I remember as a kid reading Boys Life magazines, and we'd always get them in the mail because we were Boy Scouts growing up, and there was this magazine that came and it just had a bunch of different stuff in it. Well, somewhere in kind of the middle of the magazine, there was always this. It wasn't like a comic strip, but it was like an animated story of someone who did something brave. And this was anything from, a Boy Scout, and they were always Boy Scouts, right? A Boy Scout who saved his friend from drowning, or who, helped keep his little sister away from people that were trying to kidnap him, or helping little kids find their parents. Or I distinctly remember one where there was a group of people sitting in the cafeteria in high school, and this kid pulled a knife and was trying to stab people with this knife. And the Boy Scout, the heroine in the story, and these were all true stories, he kind of, told everyone, get away. And he kind of talked this kid out of what he was doing, and then ended up wrestling and grappling with the knife and then getting it away from him. And it's just kind of like heroic situations.
Yeah.
And so those always were like super, like, they impressed me a lot. And I remember I was probably like, 13, 14 years old. And I remember I was over at a friend's house, and there was a cat that was stuck in a tree. And this cat was like a little kitten, and it was stuck super high in this tree. And we were trying to get this cat out of this tree. And I had climbed up there super high, and it was kind of a dangerous situation, and I'd gotten like a bunch of stuff in my eyes, and so I couldn't see. And I remember when I was climbing down from the tree, I was like, they're definitely going to write about this in Boys Life magazine. Maybe that was just my pride speaking, but I was like, oh, somebody's got to write this into a Boys Life magazine. This was such a brave thing that I did, to save this cat. That was stupid, like little kid daydreaming stuff. But
that's hilarious.
It was funny.
Hey, well, I think that, it's good. I think men and boys even women should aspire to do great things and take great actions. Maybe not stupid actions, but still. That's cool. That's a cool story. So do you want to, I have two main stories that I can share. And I know you have a couple. Maybe I'll start with, actually I have three. I'll start with one of mine. So this is, I've been watching the news recently. And have you heard about what's going on in China right now?
With the COVID stuff?
Yeah, so they're trying to do like zero COVID policy, and they're locking everybody down. And
I saw these things where they were driving like these fogging trucks through the streets and like spraying chemicals, fogging the whole city of like, dude,
oh yeah,
that's gonna kill everybody.
yeah. And so there's all these people who are fighting back against this like army of like people in COVID gear, which is absolutely insane. And there's people that are really fighting back against this, and they're people in the streets of China chanting, replace Xi Jinping as the president. Apple, even the company Apple, they were the country's got, the Chinese government has everything social media so shut down that nobody can share anything. So what people were doing is they were getting on their iPhones and they were doing photo drop, like how you can airdrop photos.
Yep.
And they were sharing things that way, and things were going viral through airdrop. And the Chinese government told Apple, hey, you need to cut this service off. So Apple cut that service.
Oh, I'm sure they said, okay, whatever you want.
Okay, yeah, right away, sir, right away.
Did Joe Biden tell you to do that? Yeah, sure, let's do it.
Oh yeah, Joe Biden definitely has got his knees. You heard about the Twitter files that came out, right?
Oh yeah, we should do an episode.
We should do an episode just on Twitter files. But anyway, so this whole thing, these people are fighting against this. They're literally getting locked in their homes. They're getting welded. They'll weld shut the doors to their apartment complexes, so people will stay in their homes. And they are making these camps. They're like these quarantine camps. So they'll just drag people out of their home and throw them in these camps. I mean, it's crazy, tyrannical government type stuff.
I saw a video of people all in like COVID gear and masks and like full body suits and stuff, and they were breaking down these people's doors like with battering rams. They were just coming in and just busting the doors open and running in and like dragging people out.
Oh yeah. I saw one video, and then there was a guy, so this is kind of getting to my point, and he was walking down the street, and he was just like holding up a sign. He was like, there's more of us than there is of them, and we need to stand up for freedom. And there are actually people chanting like, give me liberty, or give me freedom, or give me death. Like, where have we heard that before, right?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of these people are like, hey, we want to be free. And this guy was walking along the street saying this, and the police grabbed him. And people were all just standing around kind of filming, and they're like, oh, man. And they grab him, and they're trying to shove him into this police car, and he's just screaming his lungs out, and there's a picture of it, and he's like just screaming, and it's like, wow, incredible.
Okay, never be heard from again.
Yeah, so it made me think that, that guy was showing a lot of valor. When I think about China specifically, I think back to the Tank Man. Do you know who Tank Man is? The mysterious.
Oh
Tank
yeah,
Man?
the guy in Tiananmen Square.
Exactly. So in 1989, there were a bunch of protests similar to what there is right now in Tiananmen Square, which is in Beijing, China. So it was a kind of a student-led protest that was against inflation, the inability to participate in the political system, as well as against corruption of the government, and also for free speech. So a lot of it's probably worse now than it was then as far as what the government was trying to do. So martial law was enacted, and the Red Army, with over 300,000 troops, were mobilized to Beijing to squash this thing. The Red Army moved in through the city and into the square where thousands of people were protesting, and there were a lot of bystanders gathered as well. So the Red Army would arrest hundreds, and at one point they just began to shoot automatic weapons into the crowd, just killing hundreds of people, wounding thousands. And a stunning show of valor, one man stepped in front of a column of 4 Type 59 tanks in an effort to stop their progress. So there's a very famous video which is absolutely wiped clean in China. It's like totally censored, but there's these 4 tanks coming down the road, and this guy who's got like groceries in his hands he steps out into the middle of the road and stands right in front of these 4 tanks. Probably anybody who's older has almost guaranteed seen this, but maybe for some of our younger listeners, this might sound like something new. But he stood in front of these 4 tanks in a solo effort to stand up to a repressive regime. It was quite the example of valor in my mind. It's something that he did as an act of defiance and just simply putting himself in front of that. And also the tanks stopped and they kind of try to wiggle around him, but he just kind of steps to the side and stands right in front of him. He steps right where they're going. It's right in front of those tanks. And think about those people that are in the tank, they're like, oh, are we going to run over this guy who's just standing there? So it's kind of a conundrum. It almost speaks to the humanity of the people in the tanks stopping and saying, are we really going to run over this guy? And just more details on that, what exactly happened. So very few details actually exist about that man or who he even was. So on November 28th is when this year is when these major protests are happening. Someone commented that everyone thinks that the Chinese people are afraid to come out and protest, that they don't have the courage, said this protester. And he said, actually, in my heart, I also thought of this. But when I went there to a protest that was happening, this was 2022, I found that the environment was such that everybody was very brave. And so I think it's just so interesting that kind of defiance, even though it's been tamped down since the 80s, it's still alive today in mainland China, and not just Taiwan. And right now, the Chinese government is also starting to mobilize some of their armored tanks and stuff to quell this rebellion. People have sent videos of tanks and heavy vehicles moving. And so, to anybody, any of our brothers in China that may be listening, more power to you. Keep fighting the good fight. And your example of valor is not lost on us. I don't know if we don't have any listeners in China. We're probably censored in China.
Yeah, definitely censored.
I hope that we're censored in China. But anyway, definitely a cool thing to look at brave men and women around the world standing up against tyranny.
And not only standing up, but standing up and knowing that you could potentially lose your life, or that you could get suicided, or that you could disappear forever. That definitely takes bravery.
But they don't even do it under the guise of suicide. They just outright shoot you in the street because no one's going to do anything. You have no redress of grievances.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good story. So I had a story about a boy. So this was in 1991, and there's a young man who was a senior in high school, and his name was Chris Eriks. And he was sitting in math class one day, and there was another boy who came into the math class at Stevens High School in Rapid City, South Dakota. Walked into math class. He told the teacher, "Get out." And then he held up the other 22 students in the class, including this Chris Eriks. He held them hostage with a sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun for 4 hours. He had all the students crowded in the corner of this room, and the kid with the shotgun, his name was Ryan Harris. He somehow was on the intercom system with the police from the room, and he was making all kinds of demands. He wanted pizza and cigarettes and $1 million, and then he wanted a helicopter to land on the roof of the school and take him away. And he had fired this sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun. He had fired it several times in the room, and he made sure that everyone knew that he had plenty of ammunition. And so he shot the chalkboard, the ceiling, the window out, and all this different kind of stuff. So all these other 22 kids are sitting in kind of the corner of the room. But then, for one moment, this Ryan Harris guy, the gunman, he put his gun down in just a kind of a lapse of judgment so that he could do something with both of his hands. And Chris Eriks saw his window, and he jumped for the gun. And so they ended up both kind of trying to get hands on the gun, and they struggled for a while. But then the senior in the class, Eriks, he ended up winning the tug of war and overpowered the gunman, ended up taking the gun away. And then obviously he pointed it at the kid, and then they announced that, hey, we got him, and the police came in and everything else. But in 2011, which this was like, what is this, 20-something years later, they did an interview, kind of like a story piece on this guy who saved all these kids in this class. And they interviewed the police chief of that time. And the police chief said, "To this day, I am so proud of Chris Eriks for having the courage to do what he did to bring the situation to a close." It was 20 years later. The police captain still kind of remembered that and had such like a fond memory of that. So, you know, you had said earlier, you know, you don't want to put yourself in danger, you know, you don't want to die potentially trying to do something. But I think kind of what we said, it depends on the risk. You know, you got to weigh the risks, but you know, it depends on the reward, I guess, is
sometimes
a better way to say that. And saving people and finding your window and taking action immediately, you know, that's pretty cool. Pretty cool that someone had kind of the guts to stand up to someone in the face of potentially, you know, getting shot or whatever else.
Yeah, that's cool. It kind of reminds me of one I didn't really cover, but those guys who were on that train in like the Americans, 3 Americans that were on a train in like France. Some dude comes out of like the bathroom and yells Allah Akbar, and he pulls out his AK, and these dudes stormed him. And I think one of them got shot in the arm or something like that. But
I remember that.
Yeah, I think we talked about that on one of our episodes.
Yeah.
But that's a cool story. One of the next ones I wanted to share was, and this one's a little bit long, but I think it's pretty interesting. There's a story about, and this isn't necessarily someone who went out and was, you know, fighting a battle or anything, but definitely the bravery and the valor that it took to do this. So this is a story of 2 teenage young girls who helped hide 13 Jews from the occupying German forces in their town in Poland. So the story is of a 14-year-old named Stefania, and her little sister begins in 1939 when the 2 children were working. They used to work for a Jewish family at a grocery store in Poland. And then when the Germans invaded, their father, he actually died of an illness, and their mother and brother were sent by the Germans off to work in a camp by the Germans. So left these 2 girls, a 14-year-old and her younger sister, alone. And the 2 girls who had jobs at the local, they actually got jobs at the local factory because the Jewish grocery store they could work got shut down. And these Jews got sent to the ghetto. So these girls got jobs at the factory and did all they could to help get people out of the ghettos. And so they would actually sneak children out and others out, and they would hide them in their house. In fact, one of the guys who escaped was that owner of that grocery store that they used to work for. And so the girls knew that the punishment for harboring Jews was death, but they couldn't just stand idly by and let these trains stop by that ghetto and take people to Auschwitz and Belzec death camps. So the trains would come by, they would load up a bunch of people from the ghetto, take them straight to Auschwitz and this other death camp, Belzec. So absolutely terrifying. And at the time, they probably didn't even know what it was. They probably only heard rumors, but obviously not a place where you want to be going. These 2 girls ended up hiding 13 people in their attic, one of which would be her future husband of Stefania. They had been taught when they were children by their parents that we are all children of the same God. And so they decided to treat everyone that way. Now, they worked hard to find food, because imagine just feeding yourselves or 2 little girls in a place where food is scarce. They had to work very hard to provide enough food for them and the 13 people that were living up in their attic hiding. So they knitted sweaters, they worked various different jobs, and they were able to provide those hiding in their attic with some food. So interesting a little bit about the life in the attic. So life in the attic for the group of 13 was a mixture of boredom and fear. One of the group, Janek Zimmerman, also wrote about everyday life in hiding. He said, "We didn't talk to each other at all in the attic. The tin of the roof was hot during the day, and it was cold at night. During the day, we stayed in the hiding place or went downstairs. Any attempt to go outside could end in denunciation. From time to time, they would go out into the garden in the evening to get air and stretch our sore limbs a little. So, I mean, it was just absolutely brutal living in that. At one point, 2 German soldiers came to the house and told the 2 girls, "Hey, you got to vacate this house. We need this house." and the girls were panicked. They didn't know what to do. And so the father of that Jewish family that was ran that grocery store, he looked at him and he said, "You girls just run, just go." And they said, "You know what? No, we're going to stay here." And they actually all came together and they said a prayer. Later that day, soldiers came by and said, "You're lucky. We're only actually going to need one room from your house." And 2 German nurses came and stayed in the house in one of the bedrooms. So now imagine having 2 German nurses in the house that you're in. You're hiding 13 people in the attic. The German nurses stayed there for a few months, and at one point, a German soldier came into the house, and he even tried to go up to the attic, but they kind of made him lose interest in doing that, so he didn't go in. The Germans eventually were pushed out of that town, and those in the hiding place were able to emerge a year after they had been gone into hiding. So it was a full year that they were in hiding. And so I just think that the valor and courage displayed in the face of such danger continually over this course of a year. I mean, sometimes, you think, well, one act of valor, standing out, that I think is sometimes a little bit easier to do than continued valor under constant threat of being caught, a constant threat of being uncovered. That takes some stamina. And so I think it's so cool about that, and then that they were able to save those people from being murdered in those camps. And eventually, she, her husband was one of those that she had rescued. So I thought that was really cool. They actually wrote a book about this, so really cool story.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, can you imagine we can't imagine, but like the how fast your heart would be pounding if like the German soldiers like, "I'm gonna go check out the attic," and you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, freaking out!" You're like, got to think on my feet. What do I say to get this guy to get disinterested in going up to the attic? And yeah, definitely. I have another one here from the Holocaust as well, and this one is a lady named Irena Sendler, and this is a great example of what I think is bravery and valor and courage. So this was during the time the Nazis invaded Poland. They rounded up all of the Jews, and they created, like you said, Jared, some the ghettos. So they created these big walls around the ghettos, and it was just like a massive neighborhood prison that the Jews at that time were forced to stay in. So she knew what was going on in these Jewish ghettos and what the Nazis were doing. So she's actually a social worker. And she went and she got credentials to become a nurse so that she could go into the ghettos and help people out. So first she started actually sneaking in food and medicine into the ghetto so that she could help the people that were sick and starving and everything else. Well, eventually, this sneaking in food and medicine grew into her sneaking out little kids. And so she would take little kids and they would be sedated. She would sedate these kids and place them in the bottom of her toolboxes or kind of laying in burlap sacks at the bottom of her trunk that she would wheel in and out. And then once she got to the other side of the ghetto, out of the ghetto, then she would hook up with some other people that were like-minded people, and they would ship these kids off to Christian orphanages and basically save their lives. And she ended up sneaking out 2,500 kids out of the ghetto.
Way. Wow.
Yeah. By sedating them and putting them in the bottom of her trunk or under her skirt or whatever she could do to sneak these kids out of the ghetto.
2,500. I mean, geez, the guards are like, "What's going on? Where are all these people?"
Yeah.
There used to be
Yeah,
kids
they're
all
like,
over the place.
Lady, you've been back and forth like 10 times today. What's going on?
Yeah.
So eventually she was caught by the Nazis. They imprisoned her. They tortured her. They broke both of her legs, but she survived. And when the war was over, she devoted her entire life to reuniting all of the kids that she had separated with their families. as she was sneaking these kids out of the ghetto, what she would do is she would write their names on a piece of paper and she would put it in a jar. And she buried that jar in the backyard of her house. And then, after the war, she went back and dug up this jar, and she did everything she could. She dedicated the rest of her life to reuniting these kids with their families. And honestly, it kind of proved to be nearly impossible to do so. And I don't think many were returned. Yeah, crazy story. Crazy, like, I mean, that's valor right there.
Wow.
That is doing something good at risk and courageous at risk of your own safety. Just kind of like, the other stories that we've talked about.
Yeah, it's funny how we chose basically the same exact story, but a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's so true. I think that prolonged, like, 2,500 kids, it's amazing.
Yeah. And I guess they were, it didn't say what ages they were, but I mean, they had to have been pretty small if she was able to sedate them. I guess if you sedated a 4-year-old and crumpled them up small enough, you could get them into a bag.
Yeah, exactly. That's crazy. So I have one more story. I don't think I've told this on the podcast before, but I may have because I think it's kind of a cool story. So this one is a story of El Pipila.
Hey.
So El Pipila is a story of a guy in Mexican Revolution. So this is the Mexican Revolution in 1810 against the Spanish. So during the Mexican Revolution against Spain, in the city of Guanajuato, Mexico, which is where I lived for a time and when I was in Mexico, the Spanish had taken refuge in kind of a stone grain house at the center of the city. And the town had been a mining town since the 1500s. In fact, there are still mines. There's, I think, 2 mines there that are still active from that time period today. And so many of the townsfolk were miners and native people who wanted freedom of speech, freedom from the Spanish, just freedom broadly. And the granary was made of stone and was the only weak point on this granary. It was it's a big square. Think of it just a big square building with that's like a wall about 2 stories high. And the only weak point on this building is the wooden door. So that is when young 28-year-old Native American named Juan Martinez, known as El Pipila, comes into the picture. So the reports of people who fought beside him described him as trustworthy, brave, strong, intelligent, and he had mestizo features, either from Otomis or Chichimecas, which are different kind of native tribes, and he had a muscular build, obviously, when I tell you what he did. So what he did is, obviously, they were trying to get in and get the Spanish. They've kind of barricaded themselves inside, and they're shooting from the rooftops. And so what he does is he puts a long, flat stone tied to his back, and to protect him from the musket fire of the Spanish troops. And he crawls to the door with a torch and some tar in his hands, and he lights the door on fire so that the door can burn down and the Mexicans can run in and vanquish the Spanish. So the insurgents, who basically far outnumbered the Spanish in the warehouse, stormed inside and killed all the soldiers and the civil Spanish refugee. So some accounts say that Pipila was not alone, but went accompanied by other indigenous miners ready to fight for their freedom from the Spanish. But as the story is told today in Guanajuato, Pipila stood alone to break through the door. So this enabled Hidalgo's forces, who was, he actually used to be a preacher. He was a father, Hidalgo, and he was the famous one that kind of declared the revolution in what they call El Grito. It was like the yell of independence. He was like, we're having enough of this. So he had his forces, and they were able to win their first victory at this battle over the Spanish because of the bravery and valor of El Pipila. After this, he survived. He went back to work in the mines until eventually he died, an old man. It says he died of gas exposure and dust from the mine, but when I looked at some of the time frames, it was like when they said he died and when they said he was born, it seems like he was 81 years old.
Wow.
So I don't know if that's a premature death or if that's a long life. I would think that's a long life for a Native a native person working in the mines. But anyway, he lived a life, and he was able to see Mexico gain its independence from the Spanish. So kind of a cool story of valor there. Similar to, it makes me think of, every time I think about this story, I think of Helm's Deep, when that one orc is running in. He's like, Legolas, shoot him, because he's running with the bomb into the door, and they shoots him a couple times, and he keeps running.
Except for he's got a big heavy stone
the
tied to his back to prevent him. It's like the first bulletproof vest.
Yeah, exactly. So he had that level 4 plates on.
Yeah. That's awesome. I had another one here. This one was kind of interesting. So remember the nuclear plant at Fukushima that had issues, and it was kind of it had an earthquake, and then it was kind of in meltdown and everything else. So Fukushima was one of the worst nuclear disasters, and it needed to be contained. So there was a massive effort to clean up and contain all of the kind of remaining debris and issues and everything that was needed to be done. Well, there was this one guy who was an engineer at Fukushima. His name was Yasuteru Yamada. Yasuteru Yamada. And he was 72 years old, and he was actually a cancer survivor. And as he was part of this effort to clean up and to kind of decontaminate everything after this nuclear disaster, he was watching all of these young men being dosed with like massive amounts of radiation just day after day, and it just tore him, because they were helping clean up, and it tore him up inside. He knew that these young guys were getting, they knew what radiation exposure was at this time. This wasn't that long ago. So he actually started a group that was, they called themselves the Skills Veteran Corps. And it was a volunteer force of elderly Japanese engineers and other helpers that volunteered to take the place of these young men that were these younger guys that were there. And he gathered, he was 72 years old, he gathered almost 400 volunteers almost immediately of elderly Japanese people, elderly Japanese men, engineers and helpers to basically take the place of these young men. So they started to work, and the elderly volunteers, they said that they accepted that the work at the plant and cleaning up, this cleanup effort, would take several years off their life at least. After a period of time, it wasn't going to happen immediately, but after a period of time, it was going to potentially shorten their life. And this Yamada guy said, I'm 72 years old, and average, I probably have 13 or to 15 years left to live. If I am exposed to radiation, cancer could take me in 20 or 30 years, which I'm not even going to live that long anyway. And so he said these younger guys, they will live that long for this cancer to develop. So therefore, us older ones have less chance of getting cancer before we die. And so I thought that was a really cool story, just of kind of the heroism of these elderly men that knew, they were like, hey, if this gives us cancer in 20 years, which it probably will, we're probably not even going to live that long anyway, so it is what it is. But you have these 30-year-olds running around, 25-year-olds, these young guys running around, they're going to die prematurely. They're going to have cancer in 20 to 30 years. And so to create a whole group of men, of over 400 volunteers, to say, yeah, I completely agree, we're going to help protect these younger guys.
Yeah, that's a great story. And you think about what they did at Chernobyl, that just, you have 30, you have 14 or 30 seconds to be out there on this roof, get your shovel, go dump something out into the core, and get back as soon as you can. You know that. I think we did an episode on that. We actually showed a scene of that on our podcast, on our TikTok, and also our Instagram. And it's just, that reminds me of what these old guys were. The old guys are like, hey, no, we're going to take this and save these young men their lives so that they don't get injured. So I think it's so cool.
Definitely a valiant effort that they put in. I had one last story.
Yeah.
So this story was actually sent in by one of our most loyal listeners of the podcast.
Nice.
This is the story of Sergeant Alvin York. And this is kind of it's a story of valor, but it's also a story of just kind of, a good old country boy just, whooping some Germans. And
always love a good old country boy whipping some Germans.
Alvin York, so I'm just going to call him York. So York was from Tennessee, and he was a very religious man, and he actually hesitated to go to war because he knew that it would require him killing people. He did lots of soul searching and talking, and he was actually finally convinced that it was okay because it was for a good cause. So he enlisted, and he joined the military, or joined the army. He actually did a really good job, kept very detailed journal of all of his experiences. And one of the first battles, actually the first battle that he was in, was in October 8th of 1918. This is World War I. So,
talk about I thought you were talking about World War II.
Well, this is
World War I, 1918.
This is World War I Germans.
That's towards the end of the war.
Yeah, that's
towards the end of the war.
Yep, it's almost the end of the war. So this is the mustard gas Germans.
Those are Kaiser Germans, not Führer Germans.
Not Nazi Germans. So the Germans, this battle, to kind of set it up, it was the Germans had all of these kind of these machine gun bunkers set up that was kind of down this hill into this valley and kind of up a little other hill where they had these bunkers. And so the Americans were attacking through the valley towards the hill to a very important railroad that was behind these German machine gun bunkers. And so they had to rush across the valley, attack the hill, and it was about several hundred yards that they had to go in order to get to the Germans. So they started running across the valley, and they realized that they were actually being shot at from the machine guns from the front as they attacked this hill across the valley, but they also was a secondary location of machine gunners that were kind of at their 3 o'clock, which kind of ended up being in their flanking position as they ran across the field. So they were getting shot by German machine guns in 2 different directions. And according to York's journal, he said that the American men were being mowed down like mowing long grass. And it was just, he said it was a bloodbath. And so York and his team, they were actually able to get to one of the boxes, the bunkers, and flank one of these machine guns, and they actually captured the Germans. And they were standing in this bunker when they captured the Germans, but then I guess one of the other bunkers realized that this one had been captured, and so they fired into the bunker that they just captured, and it killed 6 men, wounded 3 other ones, and so now they had a lot of less guys to capture the Germans that were in the bunker. And so York, his commanding officer, and the next in line commanding officer had both been killed, and so now he was this kind of relatively new guy, and he was now the highest ranking man left. So he told the men that were still there, he said, guard these German prisoners, shoot any other Germans, try to use this machine gun to do what you can. He said, I'm going to go and take out these other machine gun nests. And so he ends up running, kind of trying to flank these other machine gun nests. And so this is a quote for him. He said, the machine guns, and this is in his words, so it's country style. So he said, them he said he said them machine guns was spitting fire and cutting down the undergrowth all around me. Something awful. Every time I'd see a German, I'd just tacked him off. It was just like the old days. It was just like the old shooting matches we had in the mountains of Tennessee, except for the targets here were much bigger.
Oh man.
talking about the German soldiers. So in the middle of this fight, they were, he was kind of attacking these different boxes, kind of one by one. So in the middle of the fight, there was 6 Germans that kind of popped up and started charging towards York with their bayonets fixed. It was about 25, 30 yards away from his account. He said, I had a half a clip of my rifle left, but my pistol was ready to go. And then this is going back to quoting him. He said, I tacked off the 6th man first, then the 5th, then the 4th, and so on. That just like the way you shoot wild turkeys at home. We don't want the front ones to know that we're getting the back ones. He said, that way they keep on coming at you. Which
interesting tactic.
That was an interesting tactic. 6 guys are running at you. You shoot the guys in the back first. He said, if I would have shot the guys in the front first, then the rest of them would have dropped down and they would have just been able to overwhelm me with fire because I was only one guy.
Yeah.
But shooting them back to front made it so that they didn't know what was going on behind him, so they thought 6 guys were still coming at him. He said, I then took my rifle and kept on to the machine guns. I'd take down a few more Germans, then holler at them to surrender. Then I'd tack off a few more, and then I'd holler again, surrender. Taking large casualties and thinking that there were more men than there were, the German commanding officer called out to York in English, offering their surrender, and he accepted. So
how many people surrendered in total?
So it says, to this day, there is a memorial in France in the village of Châtel-Chéry that states, armed with a rifle and a pistol, he silenced a German battalion of 35 machine guns, killed 25 enemy soldiers, and captured 132.
Oh, captured 132 soldiers? Wow.
Yeah. Captured 132 soldiers, killed 25 of them, and silenced 35 machine guns.
That's crazy.
It was kind of a cool story. So York was promoted almost immediately. He was given the Distinguished Service Cross, and then a few months later, he was actually presented with the Medal of Honor. I think he was one of the first living soldiers to receive the Medal of Honor, which was kind of interesting. And then he survived the war. He went back and he actually lived a life of extreme debt. He was not very good with his money. And there was many times people came to him wanting to buy the rights to his story. And he would always turn them down. And then finally, towards the end of his life, he sold the rights to his story. And they ended up making a movie in the 50s or something like that. Maybe 50s or 60s about the Alvin York story. So I think it was called Sergeant Alvin York or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
So kind of a cool story,
Cool.
Bravery to the sense of he just went and did it all by himself and having the confidence to do it, but he definitely saved a lot of lives, and he didn't want to kill anybody, but he did what he had to
that reminds me of Easy Company, capturing the entire battalion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead. You were saying something.
No, I was just gonna say, that's kind of a good example of, valor, I guess. The movie was 1941. 1941 was when the movie came out. It was called Sergeant
Oh.
Alvin York.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah, I think those are all kind of stories. No, that last one was kind of a war story. Another war story that I had, which is very kind of well known. They made a movie about it a couple years ago, Hacksaw Ridge. The story of Desmond Doss, who was he was a non-combatant during World War II, and he basically said, I'll go to war, but I'm not going to carry a gun. And so he ended up rescuing over 75 men, one at a time, while under fire from the enemy, at the same time refusing to engage in combat, which was pretty valiant in and
Pretty
of
miraculous.
itself. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
good movie too.
Yeah, great movie. Well, this has been a great episode. Lots of good examples of valor, on the battlefield, off the battlefield. Definitely shows of bravery in short spurts as well as long duration valor examples. So thanks for sharing this. And also thank you to our listener for sending in a story. We always love to hear from our listeners. Please reach out to us. We always love hearing your feedback. Feel free to send us a story or send us a topic that you'd like to hear about. We're always willing to maybe do that research or maybe find someone that knows a little bit about that. Or if you have a cool story to tell, maybe reach out to us and maybe we'll have you on. We can talk about something cool. So we're always willing to hear that feedback and improve if we can. So we're building our creeds together. So let's go ahead and do that together. Right, Ethan?
Yeah, let's build that creed together.